In every family, there is sometimes one person who gets protected no matter what they do. For years, Paige was that person. She took, lied, demanded, and still everyone called her the special one. Elena was the quiet one, the responsible one, the granddaughter who handled the medicine, the bills, the records, and the truth. But Grandma Sylvia saw everything. She knew exactly who loved her and who only loved her money. So before she died, she gave Paige exactly what her greed deserved and gave Elena the one thing no liar could destroy.
Call me Elena Hart. 31. Lies take 3 seconds to cross a desk. I was timing them, sitting in that frigid deposition room. I stared at my cousin, Paige. She wore a borrowed silk blouse, perjuring herself with the casual grace of a pro. She swore she saw Grandma sign that document meant to steal my inheritance. Paige smirked. She thought she'd won. She still saw me as the quiet girl she used to bully, not realizing I'd spent months building a legal trap she could never escape. Before I reveal what I pulled from my bag to shatter that smug look, please hit like and subscribe to Family Drama. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I read every single one. Now, let's go back 3 months to the day Paige signed her own financial death warrant. A Tuesday, 9:14 in the morning. We were in the lobby of Julian Stone, an estate attorney with an office overlooking the valley. Paige and my Aunt Karen were already there, fighting over whether to rip out Grandma Sylvia's original floors or just paint over them. My brother, Leo, sat beside me staring at his shoes. I kept still, eyes on the clock. Finally, Stone opened his door. As Paige and Karen pushed past him to grab the best chairs, Stone rested a hand on my arm. He pulled me into the hall, whispering, "Keep your cool. There is a second document." I walked in and took the last seat. Stone sat behind his desk, cracked open a leather folder, and began reading Sylvia Miller's last will and testament. It was brutal. Sylvia left the historic Pine Street estate, the classic cars, and all assets to her eldest granddaughter, Paige. Paige gasped, hugged Karen, and smirked at me. She'd always been the golden child, lavish trips, jewelry, gifts. I was just the one who managed the estate, the records and the ledgers. Now she had the crown jewels. Stone waited for the noise to die down. He reached into his drawer, pulled out a thick stack of stapled papers, and slid them toward Paige. "These are the administrative obligations," he stated. "Standard assumption of liability. I need your signature to transfer the deed." Paige never read the first page. She never checked the second. She grabbed the pen and signed with a flourish, thinking she was a millionaire holding all the cards. I watched Stone fold his hands, eyes locked on me, not her. She shoved the papers back and grinned. "Sorry, Elena. Grandma always knew who enjoyed the finer things." I stood up. I smoothed my jacket, caught her gaze, and dropped the only words I would say that day. "Congratulations, Paige. Have you ever let an arrogant person dig their own grave just by letting them ignore the fine print? Tell me in the comments." We left the office and walked to the parking garage in total silence. The tension between Leo and me was heavy. Paige and Karen stayed back to ask the receptionist for luxury real estate referrals, spending money they hadn't even touched yet. Walking to my car, the concrete triggered a memory. 19 years ago, at Sylvia's kitchen table, I was 12, a Tuesday in autumn, the house smelling of dried lavender. I had a blue plastic pill organizer on the oak table, sorting daily meds, white pills for blood pressure, yellow for cholesterol, my weekly routine. Paige was 14 and supposed to be sweeping instead. I watched her glide into the kitchen. She slipped her hand into Sylvia's brown leather purse, which rested on the chair. Paige snatched a crisp $50 bill, folded it, and bolted out the back door. Sylvia sat at the head of the table, sipping tea and reading the paper. She didn't yell. She just set her cup down, locked eyes with me, and clicked her silver pen. One sharp click in the quiet kitchen. Then, back to the newspaper. That was when I understood my grandmother. Sylvia never missed a deficit. She just let the debt accumulate. I once asked her why she let Paige get away with it. She handed me receipts to organize. "Logistics is the art of putting things where they belong. Elena," she said, "people are no different. You let them show you where they belong first." Sylvia S. wisdom echoed as I drove away from the law office. I couldn't dwell on Paige's hollow victory. The inheritance meant my role managing the mountain retreat was officially over. I'd run that property for 7 years, the winterization, the roof repairs, the taxes, and the emergency plumbing calls at 2 in the morning. Paige only visited to host ski weekends, leaving me with the trash. By Thursday, I was at the cabin packing files into boxes. The canyon air was thin and smelled of pine. My brother Leo was there, taping boxes, along with his wife, Nia. Nia is a senior paralegal at a downtown corporate firm. She reads dense contracts for a living and people even faster. She is a sharp, brilliant woman who doesn't waste words or suffer fools. While Leo stressed about how Aunt Karen would treat us now that Paige controlled the assets, Nia stacked my ledgers into perfect columns. "Let them talk, Leo," Nia said. She slid the packing tape across the floor. "Talk is cheap, documentation is expensive." Outside, gravel crunched. A luxury SUV pulled up. Paige stepped out, wearing white winter boots that had never touched mud. Karen followed, holding a clipboard like a shield. They stormed inside without knocking. "You need to be out by noon," Paige demanded. "No hello, no offer to help." She wrinkled her nose at the files Nia was organizing. "I am listing this place by the end of the month. The market is hot, and I am not paying for seasonal maintenance." I didn't argue. I zipped my bag. "The furnace service records and the plow driver-s info are on the counter. Call him before November or he'll drop you." Paige waved her hand. "I hire a management company." "Keys, Elena, hand them over, all of them." I pulled the heavy silver keyring from my jacket, 6 keys in total. I handed the ring to her. Paige held it up, sifting through the brass and steel. She paused at the oldest, heaviest key. It was tarnished with a strange, complex bit. It didn't match any lock on the property. Sylvia had kept it on that ring for decades. "What is this?" Paige asked. "I don't know," I said. "It was always there." Paige scoffed. She worked the metal off the loop and tossed the rest into her bag. She held the vintage key with pure distaste, holding it by the edge like it might stain her manicure. "Keep the garbage," she sneered, throwing the key directly at my chest. It missed. Nia stepped forward and caught the key mid-air. Her reflexes were honed from years of catching heavy files. Nia studied the tarnished metal, running her thumb over the deep grooves. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't hand it back. Aunt Brenda marched into the living room, heels clicking sharply. She pointed a finger at me. "You've leeched off this family long enough, Elena," she snapped. Her voice rang off the ceilings. "You hid in Karen's shadow, playing the sweet helper while waiting for a handout. You a parasite. The free ride is over. Pack your junk and get off my daughter's property." I studied Brenda, then looked at Paige, who wore that same hollow grin from the office. I stayed silent. I didn't fight back. I grabbed the last box. Leo hauled the rest. Nia brushed past Paige without a word, her shoulder clipping Paige's expensive coat. We hit the freezing mountain air and stuffed the boxes into my car. As Leo slammed the trunk, Nia turned. She opened her palm, showing the tarnished key, her gaze cutting through the fog. "That's not a door key, Elena," Nia said, precise and cold. "The teeth are too short. The barrel is thick and hollow. I see these at estate sales. It belongs to a vintage cedar trunk." I stared at the dark metal in her hand. Karen had a massive antique trunk at the foot of her bed in the Pine Street house, the one Paige just inherited, the place Paige is currently rekeying. Karen kept that trunk locked my entire life, never opened it for anyone. Brenda called me a parasite, but she had no clue what Paige just tossed away. The drive down the canyon was quiet. My phone buzzed. A secure email from Marcus Vane's office. No subject line, just one sentence. "Return alone through the back entrance at 1:00 sharp. The trap was set." I followed the email to the letter. I parked 3 blocks away in a public lot and walked to the high-rise housing the Vane law firm, slipping through the alley behind the bank. The rear entrance was a plain steel door for deliveries. At 1:00, I hit the faded brass buzzer. The lock clicked open. I skipped the lobby and took the freight elevator to the 14th floor. Vane stood at the end of the hall. Not behind his desk today. He led me to a small table near a window overlooking the valley. 2 files sat on the desk, one thin, one thick. Sit, Elena. No pity, we re strictly business now. The grieving lawyer act was over, replaced by a cold. Sharp strategist, Vane had managed my grandmother's affairs for decades. He handled the plant sale back in the 90s and knew her better than anyone. He tapped the thin file. This is the will Paige signed today, he said, the public version. The estate, cars, and accounts were all hers. My lawyer slid the heavy folder over. This was the secret trust Grandad drafted 3 years ago. I was the sole heir. Chloe was completely cut out. I scanned the binder. Page 2 held the summary. Grandma had quietly funneled her wealth into private funds over a decade. It totaled $4.2 million, I gasped. I read it twice, then looked at my attorney. Why give her the house? Why split it like that? He leaned in, because that house is a sinking ship. Grandma took out a massive loan years ago. She used the cars for private credit and skipped the taxes. Chloe just inherited $800,000 in debt. I crunched the numbers. Grandma had drained the visible assets to fund the trust, leaving a financial trap for Chloe. She took the bait the moment she signed. She inherited every debt. My attorney handed me an envelope. Grandma wanted you to have this once you knew the truth, he said. I broke the seal. Inside was thick paper, Grandma's handwriting. Logistics is about placing things where they belong. People are the same. You let them show you their nature. She had watched Chloe and her mother's greed for years. She crafted this trap so perfectly they walked right into it, blinded by their own hunger. While I sat there, Chloe was staging a victory lap. My brother sent a clip of her social media. She was at a posh rooftop brunch, wearing a dress bought on credit, laughing, sipping $200 champagne. Her mother sat nearby, snapping photos. Chloe looked at the camera, eyes bright with hollow triumph. She toasted to her new legacy. The comments poured in hearts from people fooled by her fake life, celebrating her climb while drowning in debt. I turned my phone over. The contrast was sickening. I looked at the attorney. How soon will she realize? He checked his watch. The first default notice hits in 10 days. Then the tax office moves in. Banks do not care about her online presence. They want their money. Once she finds out the cash is gone, she will come hunting for you. I grabbed the folder, its weight feeling like armor. What happens then? I asked. He turned. She will drop the grieving act and become a desperate debtor. Desperate people play dirty. She will try to break the trust. You must secure your defenses before the first bank letter hits her door. I called my cousin immediately. I explained the trap. My cousin did not blink. She processed the info like a pro. Chloe just posted an update, she said. She is hiring locksmiths to change the house keys at 4. I checked the time. 2:15. We had just over an hour. I told her to meet me at Grandma's old Victorian place. From the street, it looked grand. Up close, the paint was peeling and the driveway was cracked. Chloe never noticed the decay, only the status. I used my key to get us in. My cousin arrived minutes later. We went to the master suite. It was freezing, smelling of mothballs and floor wax. At the foot of the bed sat a cedar chest. She pulled an old key from her pocket. She knelt, jamming it into the lock. It groaned and clicked open. I lifted the lid. The room filled with the scent of cedar and lilac perfume. The chest was packed with blankets. She cleared them out and pulled a tape measure from her bag. There is a 3-inch gap, she noted. She felt the bottom, pressing the corners. She found a catch near the right bracket. The base plate shifted, and we lifted the false floor. Inside was a ledger with a faded navy cover. I grabbed it. The pages were filled with Grandma's handwriting, a brutal list of dates, incidents, and the reality behind every lie. I flipped through 4 years of time-stamped evidence. I found an entry. Rita demanded $6,000 for a seminar. Reality, a luxury trip to Cabo. I turned the page. Rita stole an emerald brooch, claiming it was lost. Reality, appraised at $4,500. I saw her wearing it in a photo later. Every theft was documented. Grandma hadn't just watched, she had built a case. This ledger was the ultimate evidence. We grabbed it, restuffed the chest, and cleared out by 3:40. 20 minutes later, the locksmiths secured a house full of debt, while we digitized the pages. The thieves were still busy playing Queen. Armed with a fake sense of destiny, Chloe drove her SUV to a branch of First Fidelity downtown. I did not need to guess how it went. A bystander filmed the scene, and my brother sent it to our group chat. She sat across from a loan officer, looking like the heiress she pretended to be. She slid her papers over, asking for a $500,000 credit line. The banker checked her file. His face changed when he saw the liens on the house. He turned his monitor toward her. "Ma'am," he said coldly, "I cannot approve credit. The property is heavily leveraged." Chloe laughed. "That is impossible," she snapped. "The house is paid off," she insisted. The banker shook his head. "I am looking at the records. A balloon mortgage is due in 45 days. Plus years of unpaid taxes. You are underwater." The camera zoomed in as her face crumbled. She stared at the screen, realizing the truth. "You are lying," she screamed. Her voice went shrill. "Grandma was wealthy. You are looking at the wrong file, I assure you." "These are the filings," the banker said, deadpan. "If you inherited the estate, you inherited the debt. See a lawyer." She stood, shoving her chair back. She slammed her hands on the desk, demanding the manager, her shouting drawing stares from the entire lobby. That video caught the whole meltdown. I rewatched it twice as her screaming faded. I slammed my laptop shut. The room felt suffocating. The clock was ticking, but we had far less time than expected. Chloe was broke and desperate. She would burn anyone to stay afloat. Extortion was coming, and I had the ledger ready, but that viral clip had already cornered her. She was flat broke, holding a deed the bank would grab within weeks. A rational person files for bankruptcy. Chloe was not rational. She was a narcissist without an audience. She needed a scapegoat and cash to fund a legal war. She found her mark at her Mother S place south of the city. She drove there early the next morning. I heard later about the screaming. She did not ask for help. She performed a tragedy. She sobbed on the couch, spinning lies about her stolen fortune. She convinced her mom that hiring a shark attorney was the only way to save the family name. Her mother, blinded by the act, risked everything. 3 days later, she signed a second mortgage, handing over $100,000. With the lawyer hired, Chloe went on the offensive. Grandfather was a titan, and Grandma was a charity icon. Chloe weaponized their legacy. She hit church in dark glasses, looking somber while whispering poison. She posted cryptic rants about betrayal and elder abuse. Her story was consistent. She claimed Grandma wanted her to have the cash, but that I had embezzled it. I became a total outcast. Friends went silent. Even the local baker would not look at me. My brother wanted to fight back. I stopped him. Never interrupt an enemy making a mistake. I knew the silence was phase 1. The next move would be extortion. I managed logistics for a regional distributor. It is loud, chaotic work. One rainy Thursday, I stepped out of my office. A sleek SUV sat parked illegally in our loading zone. Chloe waited there, rocking a trench coat and a designer bag. Grandma's money, for sure. She did not look broke. She looked dangerous. I gripped my clipboard. "We need to talk," she snapped. Her voice cut right through the warehouse hum. "You are in a loading zone," I said. "Move it." She closed the distance. Smelling of overpowering perfume, the grieving granddaughter act was dead. A smirk twisted her face. "I know about the accounts, Josie. You think I believe Grandma burned through millions. You stole my inheritance." I stared back, pulse steady. "I did not steal a cent. Grandma gave you exactly what you earned." Chloe laughed, cold and sharp. "Transfer 50,000 by Monday, or I tell the whole city you are a thief." "We can settle this," she insisted. I just stared. "You are trying to extort me." She narrowed her eyes. "I am saving her legacy, if you refuse. I will ruin your career. You will lose everything. Pay up or prepare for war. Once. I might have cracked, but Grandma taught me better. Logistics is all about order." Her threats meant nothing. "Not a dime," I said. She flushed. "You are making a massive mistake. Move the car, Chloe. I have trucks coming." I locked the door and watched her storm off, tires screeching. I finished my shift, logged the inventory, and drove home. My partner had left files on the counter. I grabbed coffee and opened my laptop. I did not cry over lost friends. I did not fear for my job. I opened a spreadsheet. Column 1, public lies. Column 2, reality. I pulled up her social media and started documenting. She claimed I stole $30,000 last winter. I checked Grandma S. Blue Ledger. There it was in her cursive. Chloe had taken that money to cover her own tax debt. 4 hours of cross-referencing. I built a web of facts. Every lie became ammunition. I was not fighting in the court of public opinion. I was going to let her dig her own hole. I would hand the shovel to a judge. If you've been the villain in a liaress story, hit subscribe. Let me show you how silence wins. Chloe was out of moves. She realized bullying was a dead end. She crossed the line. She drafted a fake document to force my hand. The silence lasted exactly 96 hours. Then she vanished. No posts, no gossip. Leo thought she was gone. I knew better. In logistics, a sudden stop never means the end. Everything is falling apart. I need a bigger hammer. Tuesday. My phone buzzed at the desk. It was Thomas Gable, my attorney. I stepped away from the forklifts. He sounded like a pilot reporting engine failure. "We have a crisis, Josie. Rita just filed an emergency motion in probate court." "What document?" "An amendment to the trust," he said. "Handwritten. Signed by your grandmother a week before she died. It names Rita as a co-trustee with access to every dollar." My breath caught. That is a forgery. Evelyn built that trust to stop her. She would never sign that. Gable sighed. "I believe you, but the court sees filings as facts until proven otherwise." It had a signature and a notary seal. The judge granted a preliminary injunction. "The trust is frozen, Josie. All $4.2 million is locked in escrow. Not a cent for you." The truth hit hard. It was a surgical strike. She knew I lived on a salary. By freezing the trust, she cut my supply lines. I had no war chest. I could not pay Gable. She was funding her legal team with equity from Brenda's home. She wanted me starved out, hoping I would settle to stop the bleeding. I ended the call and finished my shift on autopilot. Driving home, the sky looked like a bruise. Leo and Naya were waiting. Naya, a paralegal, had already pulled the court filing. High-resolution copies were spread across the island. Leo was pacing, clearly wired. "How did she pull this off?" he asked. "The signature is flawless. It looks exactly like Grandma. If the judge believes this, she walks away with half the fortune. She wins." I stared at the pages. Blue ink, flowing cursive, a fake change of heart, and there, at the bottom, was the signature next to the notary's stamp. It was terrifyingly real. The spacing, the tremors, it was all her. For a second, I felt sick. Did Rita force her to sign a blank page? Nia did not panic. She pulled up a stool. She fished her glasses out and slid them on. Naya reviews legal docs like a jeweler checking a diamond. She ignores the sparkle and hunts for tiny fractures. "Leo, stop pacing," she said softly without looking up. "Panic is useless. Let me read." The room went silent, just the fridge humming and paper rustling as Nia flipped the pages. She studied the document for 10 solid minutes. She ignored the signature and focused on the body paragraphs. Nia tapped the first page. "Josie, remember when Evelyn broke her wrist?" The question triggered a memory. I nodded. 1998. She slipped on black ice and fractured her right radius. Naya leaned back. The bone set poorly. I recall her medical records. Arthritis set in, limiting her range of motion. It ruined her biomechanics. How did that change her writing? I pictured the blue ledger in her chest, those thousands of lists and cards. "She could not bend her wrist inward," I replied. To manage the stiffness, she had to angle the paper. It gave her cursive a strict 15-degree rightward slant. She never wrote a vertical line after that. Naya slid the forgery toward me. "Look at the lowercase t in the word estate," she instructed. I leaned in. The vertical line of that T was perfectly straight, perpendicular to the notebook lines. The crossbar was drawn with rigid precision. I scanned the rest. Every single T and L stood upright, like stiff soldiers. They missed that distinct 15-degree slant defined by Evelyn S. hand. Nia pulled off her glasses. Forgery is cognitive overload, she explained, when an amateur mimics handwriting. They pour all their focus into the signature. They practice until the loops look right. But when they forge 2 full pages, the brain tires. Muscle memory takes over. They stop maintaining the disguise on the boring letters. Rita tried so hard to nail the name that she forgot how Evelyn actually wrote. The knot in my stomach turned to cold clarity. Rita never forced Evelyn to sign anything. She wrote the whole thing herself. "We can prove it is fake," Leos said. "Show the judge. The letters are the proof. It is not that simple." Nia cautioned, "This is the legal system, not a puzzle. Law requires expert testimony to junk a sworn document. We need an analyst, a deposition for that notary, and months of grueling discovery. All while the trust stays frozen. Rita knew this. She did not need a perfect forgery, just one good enough to lock the funds. She weaponized probate court, betting I would crumble under legal fees while she played victim. She wanted me trapped. I stared at the fake document. Rita expected me to shrink. But logistics is about finding the bottleneck and clearing the path. If she wanted to play dirty, I was ready. I turned to my team. We are not waiting for an expert. We are building a war room. We map every move she has made since the will reading. Tomorrow, she gets some bait. Time to test her. Monday morning, my apartment became a command center. Furniture moved out, and 3 massive whiteboards from my warehouse moved in. Logistics demands visual data. You cannot fix a supply chain if you cannot see the obstacles. You cannot break a lie if you cannot chart the contradictions. We mapped my grandmother's final 3 years. Nia pinned ledger pages on the left for a truth baseline. We mapped Rita's social media on the right. The centerboard held the forged trust. Rita had frozen the funds, but her lawyer was draining her bank account. The equity she yanked from Aunt Brenda's house would vanish under the pressure of a legal battle. A desperate enemy makes mistakes. I planned to trigger one. I set a manila folder on the kitchen island and grabbed a thick marker. In bold letters, I wrote Evelyn Caldwell offshore accounts data on the cover. I left it near my patio door. My ground floor unit made it easy to spot through the blinds, to look authentic. I stuffed the folder with 40 pages of my own household budget spreadsheets. It was a detailed file tracking grocery inflation. Column A had dates. Column B had product codes. Column C showed price shifts that looked like stock market fluctuations. A rushed thief would see numbers and scream foreign bank transfers. A forensic accountant would realize they were looking at the price of organic eggs. I hid a motion-activated camera on the bookcase. The lens faced the kitchen. I synced the feed to my phone. Meanwhile, Nia checked the forgery's notary stamp against the state digital registry. Every stamp has a unique code. Nia typed the 8-digit number from the fake document into the database. My phone chimed at 1:14 Wednesday afternoon. I was at the warehouse, reviewing a shipping schedule. The notification read, "Motion detected." I locked my door and opened the app. High-definition footage flickered on my screen. A figure stood on my patio. It was Rita. She wore a dark hoodie and sunglasses, but that stiff posture and the designer bag gave her away. She tested the door. I had left the latch loose. She wedged a tool into the track and forced it open. Rita stepped inside, moving with jerky, frantic energy. She never checked for cameras. She lunged for the manila folder. She ripped it open and glanced at the first page of my spreadsheet. Seeing endless rows of numbers, she snapped it shut. She stuffed it into her bag and bolted, leaving the door wide open. The break-in lasted 42 seconds. I saved the clip to a secure server. I did not call the police yet. A simple burglary charge is nothing. I needed her to use those stolen files in court. I told her to get the evidence to her lawyer. She did. 2 days later, my cousin S. attorney filed an emergency motion. They demanded a full audit of my offshore assets, convinced they had me. They actually attached my grocery budget as Exhibit A. In their rush to bury me, they handed the judge proof of a crime. Her own lawyer admitted in writing that his client broke into my home and stole documents. Rita thought she won. Instead, She confessed to burglary and tried to use egg prices to prove fraud that night. Nia walked in with a document from the state notary database. She looked serious. She dropped the paper over the video of Rita raiding my place. Nia pointed at the seal on the forged amendment. The registry linked that number to a woman named Patricia Vance. I knew her. Patricia was my Aunt S. bridge partner, but Nia delivered the final blow. Patricia S. notary license had expired 2 years ago. The state pulled it. That seal was a total fake. Rita had forged both the signature and the stamp. The room felt freezing. We had video of the break-in and proof that her legal filing was a complete fraud. Our defense was rock solid. We were ready to crush her case. But her lawyer, still clueless, was already cooking up a new scheme. He figured the money angle was too slow, so he attacked the trust itself. He claimed my grandmother lacked the mental capacity to sign the papers. Hoping to void my inheritance, he prepared to demand medical records, totally unaware that my grandmother had outplayed him years ago. Her attorney realized he had hit a wall. He had submitted a stolen grocery list to a judge, thinking it was a ledger of wire transfers. When he saw those numbers were just milk and eggs, he panicked. Submitting stolen files to a judge is a fast track to losing a law license. He needed to drop the burglary angle and pivot. If he could prove my grandmother was mentally unfit, he could collapse the whole trust. Friday, our lawyer filed the motion. It was thick with legal jargon, but the point was sharp. My cousin claimed my grandmother was senile, and I had played her. She banked on the fact that she hadn't visited in years. She mistook Grandma's quiet nature for confusion, a huge mistake. Silence is a tactical advantage. I handled every single appointment. I managed the traffic, the waiting rooms, and the insurance headaches while my cousin lived off maxed-out credit cards. I knew those records inside out. Grandma anticipated every move. She knew vultures like my cousin would attack her mental state. She didn't trust hearsay. She hired a top neurologist, Dr. Thorne. Our lawyer moved fast, subpoenaing Dr. Thorne's clinic for 5 years of charts. The records arrived by courier that Tuesday. I sat with my partner, Nia, as we scanned them. Nia loves raw data, and even she was impressed. The files proved a rigorous schedule every 6 months. My grandmother underwent intense cognitive evaluations. The scores were perfect, consistently hitting the 99th percentile. Her mind was sharper than people half her age. She was brilliant. That data gutted their entire claim, but the final page was the real hammer. It was a transcript from a private consult just 2 weeks before the trust was finalized. To form a trust, you must prove you understand your assets and your intent. The doctor had grilled my grandmother to ensure she was clear-headed. I read the transcript in disbelief. My grandmother told the doctor everything. She knew my cousin was stealing from her and painting her as senile. She was building a fortress to protect my inheritance. She knew exactly what my cousin would try once she was gone. Nia finally breathed and put the paper down. That single paragraph obliterated their strategy. My grandmother wasn't confused. She was playing chess while my cousin was playing with fire. The dementia claim was dead. Jessica had wasted a fortune on legal fees. The walls were closing in. The legal bills were mounting, and my aunt was feeling the pressure of that second mortgage. Her polished facade was cracking. I saw the fallout 2 days later. I was at the grocery store, just unloading my cart. The place was quiet until I heard the rapid, frantic clicking of heels behind me. Aunt Brenda rushed up. She looked wrecked, like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her clothes were disheveled. She didn't scream, she just started sobbing. It was pure, pathetic panic. She grabbed my arm, begging me to quit, saying I was tearing the family apart. She told me to drop the trust and split the money before the lawyers took it all. She talked about blood being thicker than water. I just stared. A year ago, I might have felt guilty, but I held the ledger and video proof of her daughter breaking into my apartment. I knew Brenda had funded this abuse for years, happy to ignore it as long as the cash kept rolling in. She wasn't crying for family. She was crying because she was losing. I didn't say a word. I tapped my card at the register, waiting for approval. I bagged my groceries, moving slow and steady. Lifting the bags, I looked my aunt in the eye. "The bank is seizing your lake house Tuesday," I said, my voice flat. "Foreclosure is final. Pack your things." Her total collapse in that aisle confirmed exactly what I suspected. The funds used to fuel her legal war were crumbling under a mountain of debt. The second mortgage my aunt took wasn't an endless gold mine. It was a dying resource, drained by every hour her pricey attorney spent on garbage court motions. The fake medical claim failed. The offshore account lies just handed us proof of perjury. Jessica was out of moves, but the trust freeze held. I went home and updated our strategy boards. We needed one knockout punch for the judge. We had to smash that forged amendment so hard that lifting the injunction became their only option. My partner Mark sat at the island, studying a high-res scan of the forged papers. A highlighter cap was stuck in his teeth. He was locked on the blue notary seal at the bottom of page 2. He already knew the commission number belonged to a retired agent. But Mark is an auditor who lives for the fine print. He wanted the mechanics of the lie. "Look at this," he said, his voice sharp against the fridge hum. "Come see this." I walked over, leaning against the counter. Mark pulled the cap out and pointed to the ink ridges on the stamp. "Official seals use a press or a pad." Mark explained the pressure should be even, creating a crisp mark. "Look at the right side of this circle. See how the ink smears and thickens." I squinted at the blue mark. He was right. The right side was soaked in ink, while the left looked faded. "That is uneven pressure," Mark noted. "Happens when you use a dry stamp and mash it down, desperate to get the last bit of ink on the page. That notary was a pro. She processed hundreds of files. She never would have left a mess like this. This stamp was neglected. It sat for years before someone forced it onto this paper. It hit me. "That notary didn't stamp this," I said. "Exactly." Mark agreed, his eyes gleaming. "She gave up her license years ago, but she kept the physical stamp. She is my aunt's old bridge partner. They play cards every Thursday. Where do they play?" "They switch houses," I said, mapping out the timeline. "But they always play at my aunt's place the first week of the month." Mark tapped the forged signature. "Jessica didn't hire a corrupt pro. She found that old stamp in a junk drawer at her mother's place. She stole it. She stamped it herself. She didn't just forge your grandmother's name. She forged a state notary's seal. That turns a civil dispute into a serious felony." The weight of Mark's find changed our entire battle. We weren't just protecting an inheritance anymore. We had proof of a major crime. Taking this to the judge would ruin Jessica. She could face prison time, but a blurry stamp is just a start. A clever defense lawyer might claim the notary stamped it years ago as a favor, and the date was filled in later. We needed an undeniable anchor. We had to prove my grandmother could not have signed that paper on the date Jessica claimed. I turned from the counter to the stack of cardboard boxes from the cabin. They held years of receipts, tax forms, and property records. Paper trails never lie. I dragged the heaviest box into the living room and sliced the tape. "What are you looking for?" Leo asked, walking in with the mail. "An alibi," I said. "The forged trust amendment was dated October 14th. Jessica claimed Grandma signed it in the city house that Tuesday. If I could find a receipt, a toll record, or a card statement placing Grandma somewhere else that day, Jessica's story would fall apart." I dug through files for 2 hours, bank records, bills, invoices. Grandma was obsessed with saving receipts. She bundled them by month with rubber bands. I found the October bundle from last year. I pulled the band off and started checking the thermal paper slips. I found grocery receipts, pharmacy slips. Then I pulled a small, thick, pale yellow rectangle. I stared at the black ink. The top said the Alpine Bakery, a local spot famous for lemon tarts. I remembered that day perfectly. The bakery wasn't in the city. It was in a mountain town 200 miles south of the valley. Grandma loved their tarts. I took a day off from the warehouse to drive her down the canyon. We spent the afternoon in the courtyard, drinking coffee and eating pastries. I looked at the date on the yellow receipt, October 14th. I looked at the time. 2:15 p.m. I held the slip between my thumb and finger. I turned to Mark and Leo. Grandma wasn't in the city that afternoon, I said, my voice steady. She was 200 miles away eating a tart, and I paid for it with my card. I have the statement, Mark whistled. The trap is set, he said. We have the stolen stamp, the double forgery, and an ironclad alibi proving she was nowhere near that room. Jessica's lawyer is walking into a massacre. Leo looked at the receipt. His nerves turned into cold resolve. When do we show the judge? He asked. When does this end? Not yet, I said, sliding the receipt into a plastic sleeve. We let Jessica walk into her deposition next week. We let her sit across from my attorney and lie under oath about watching Grandma sign that paper. We let her lock her lies into the official record. We give her the rope to hang herself. Our room was ready. The strategy boards mapped an inevitable path to her defeat. She thought she was beating a simple warehouse manager. She had no clue she was walking into a calculated ambush. The deposition was set for Tuesday morning, and I planned to watch her burn her empire down. Tuesday arrived with grey skies and freezing rain. We met in the sterile office on the 14th floor. It was 10 a.m. The long mahogany table felt like a battlefield. I sat across from my attorney. Jessica sat opposite, flanked by her pricey lawyer. She wore a tailored cream blazer and a silk scarf. I knew from the gossip she bought the outfit on a high-interest card just for this. She wanted to look like an heiress defending a legacy. Polished, confident, like a woman who had never faced a consequence in her 33 years. A court reporter sat at the head of the table, fingers poised over her machine. The recording light glowed steady. The oath was given. Jessica swore to tell the truth. It takes 3 seconds for a lie to cross a table. I was counting. My lawyer opened his binder, leaving the blue ledger behind. He ignored the receipt showing she was miles away. He didn't mention the notary was suspended. He held our best evidence back. A deposition isn't for surprises. It is for letting them bury themselves. Gable gave her just enough rope. He started with a calm rhythm, hitting the facts. He asked about her bond with Sarah, then confirmed her address. He slid a plastic sleeve across the table. Inside was a copy of the fake trust amendment. Gable asked her to identify it. Rita smiled. She leaned in, claiming for the record it was her grandmother's final wish. Gable pressed for the creation details. Rita lied like a pro. She testified she visited the old farmhouse on October 14th. She claimed her grandmother was feeling nostalgic. She swore she sat on the velvet sofa and watched the will being written. She swore she watched her sign it. I studied Rita's face under those harsh lights. When we were kids, she used to steal cash from my piggy bank. When Mom asked, she would stare straight ahead and lie, but her left eye always betrayed her. An involuntary muscle spasm would twitch at the corner. It was a nervous tic she never outgrew. As she lied to the court reporter, that eye started flickering. She was terrified under that fancy blazer. She knew it was a felony, but her greed won out. Gable let her ramble for 3 hours. He pinned her down on the time, the room, and even the pen colour. He asked about the lighting and where the notary sat. He ensured her perjury was locked into the transcript, leaving no way out. Her lawyer sat there, nodding like he had already won. He thought Gable was lost. He figured we had no answer for a sworn witness. He crossed his arms, looking smug. After a break, Gable reached into his binder and pulled out a heavy manila folder. It was marked offshore account routing, the fake file I had planted on my kitchen island. Gable slid it over. Rita straightened up. A hungry look sparked in her eyes. She thought this was the kill shot. She claimed it held proof of my shady finances. Gable steepled his fingers. He asked a simple, sharp question. How exactly did you get this folder, Rita? He didn't ask about the contents. He asked about the object itself. Her lawyer stiffened, but Rita kept digging her own grave. She testified that her grandmother handed her the folder during that fake October visit. She claimed she was told to keep it as proof of my mismanagement. She lied under oath about receiving stolen goods from a dead woman. She just confessed to burglary on the record. Gable didn't blink. He kept the security footage of her prying my patio door hidden. He just said, "Thanks for confirming the chain of custody." The stenographer hit the final key. Gable shut his binder. Her lawyer looked confused. He expected a fight over bank accounts. Instead, we just packed our bags. We wrapped at 1:15. Rita stood up, smoothed her blazer, and looked at me, triumphant. She thought she outsmarted a top lawyer and her own cousin. She expected the trust funds to hit her account soon. I said nothing. I grabbed my coat and left. I took the elevator down to the city streets. The rain was washing the grime away. The cold air felt sharp. I stood under the awning watching Rita head to her car. Her lawyer held an umbrella over her. She was laughing. She thought she had won. She had no clue she just trapped herself with perjury, evidence tampering, and clear-cut burglary. Her own words were the final nails in her coffin. We had the transcript, the receipt, and the footage. The trap was perfect. I drove home to meet Nia. I handed over my notes. She gave me a sharp smile. The perjury was set. We won the legal war before the judge even saw the file. While Rita celebrated her imaginary win, her actual world was collapsing. She wasted months and borrowed cash on this lawsuit, ignoring the ticking bomb at the house. Her 30 days were up. The balloon mortgage was due, and the bank was finished with polite letters. Reality was arriving. Rita left the building on a cloud of fake confidence, playing queen for 48 more hours. She ignored the mail piling up on her porch. Logistics don't care about lawsuits. When a mortgage hits maturity, banks don't care about probate. The bank follows the contract. The grace period ended Thursday at midnight. By Friday morning, foreclosure was a hard reality. Rita stayed oblivious. She decided Friday was the perfect day to live stream a house tour for her fans. Leo watched the feed from our war room. Rita walked through the living room in a robe, holding coffee. She pointed out the moulding and the fireplace. Talking about tearing out cabinets for an open-concept kitchen, she spoke like she had endless cash. Then the doorbell rang, twice, sharp and loud. Rita laughed, joking about a delivery. She walked to the heavy front door and pulled it open, phone still in her hand. The camera caught a man on the porch in a grey suit, holding a stack of envelopes. "Are you Rita Caldwell?" he asked. She adjusted her robe and said yes. The man handed her the papers. "You have been served," he said flatly. He walked back to his car. Rita lowered the phone, but the live stream kept running, showing a shaky view of the floor. She tore open the top envelope and brought it into frame. The header was clear in bold ink. Notice of default and foreclosure. Notice to vacate. The bank was taking the house. Her followers watched the reality of her life shatter in real time. The phone hit the floor with a loud crack, and the feed died. Aunt Sharon watched the broadcast from her townhouse. Sharon measured her value by net worth and social status, and she raised Chloe to mirror those shallow priorities. Sharon even took out a second mortgage on her home to fund the legal war, certain the stolen trust funds would pay her back. As the feed cut to black, panic set in. Sharon checked her bank portal, stomach churning. That high-end litigation lawyer demanded huge retainers, charging hundreds of dollars an hour just to send emails and draft useless motions. Sharon stared at her screen, shaking. The $100,000 she pulled from her home equity was gone. Her balance was basically zero. She had nuked her retirement to fight for an estate the bank had just seized. Chloe was homeless, and Sharon was dead broke. Their fake empire had collapsed, leaving a mountain of toxic debt while they spiraled. Thomas Gable launched our final move. Friday afternoon is a dead zone for lawyers. Everyone is just trying to clear their desk. Gable timed it perfectly. He sent a digital file to Chloe's lawyer at exactly 3 o'clock. The subject line read, "Respondent Discovery Production." Expecting standard financial updates, the lawyer opened the folder. Instead, he found a collection of devastating evidence. The first file was a high-resolution scan of the folder Chloe had stolen from my kitchen. Gable included every page of that 40-page spreadsheet. The lawyer zoomed in on the numbers and headers. He suddenly realized the complex offshore banking data he had filed with the judge was actually a basic grocery budget. He realized his client had committed burglary and handed him the evidence. The terror of potential disbarment hit him hard. Next, he opened the state registry record for the notary. He saw the red text marking the commission as suspended, then looked at the forged trust amendment on his desk. He checked the identification numbers. He realized the legal document he used to freeze the trust was a double forgery featuring a fake state seal. Then he opened the medical file from Dr. Thorne. He read the cognitive evaluations and the transcript where Evelyn detailed her plan to stop Chloe's theft. The dementia claim he had drafted was now a proven lie. Chloe S. attorney was a man who valued his bar license way more than any client. He saw the trap instantly, then reviewed the transcript from Tuesday. He read the testimony where Chloe swore she watched Evelyn sign the amendment in Utah. Then he opened Gable's fourth attachment, a bakery receipt proving Evelyn was 200 miles away buying a lemon tart when the signing supposedly happened. The attorney grabbed his phone and dialed Chloe. He didn't ask about the broadcast or the foreclosure. He spoke with the freezing, precise tone of a man who realized he had been played into committing malpractice. "You lied to me," he snapped. "You handed me stolen property. You forged a notary seal. You committed perjury on my watch." Chloe tried to interrupt, but he shut her down. "I am filing a motion to withdraw as your counsel first thing Monday," he stated. "I am citing irreconcilable ethical conflicts. You fabricated evidence. You have exposed my firm to serious sanctions. Do not call this office again." He hung up. Chloe stood in the foyer of a foreclosed house with an eviction notice in hand. Her mother was broke. Her lawyer had quit. The trust was still locked tight. Every scheme she tried to pull had snapped shut like a trap. She had no leverage left. She was a general without an army on a battlefield she didn't understand. The extortion, the forgery, the smears, everything had failed. The probate hearing was only days away. Chloe was out of time. She had to face a judge who now had every piece of proof regarding her crimes. I packed my bags in the war room, staring at the whiteboards tracking her demise. We had blocked every exit. I was ready to walk into court and finish this. The 3rd District Courthouse in Salt Lake City felt like a cold, granite tomb. Tuesday morning was freezing. I walked through security at 9:45 with Nia and Leo. We didn't talk. We moved like a team executing a final plan. Thomas Gable met us with one slim briefcase. No extra filler, just cold, hard evidence. We took our seats as Judge Harmon climbed onto the bench. Judge Holloway was a former tax attorney, cold, clinical, zero patience for drama. His courtroom was surgical. Elena arrived early. Walking down the aisle alone, she wore that same cream blazer from the deposition, but it looked lived in and wrinkled. That arrogant spark was gone. She sat at the petitioner table, isolated. Her lawyer hurried in a moment later. He avoided eye contact, heading straight for the podium. When the case was called, he immediately filed a motion to withdraw, citing deep ethical conflicts. Elena reached out, grabbing his sleeve. He pulled away without looking down. Holloway peered over his glasses at the discovery files. The judge knew exactly what those ethical flags meant. An officer of the court realized his client was feeding him fake evidence. Holloway granted the motion instantly. The lawyer left without looking back. Elena sat alone, staring at a judge who had already read every page of her crimes. Holloway offered a delay to find new counsel. She refused. She still believed her forgery would hold up. She told the judge to proceed. The hearing moved fast. Mr. Sterling stood up. He skipped the theatrics and treated the court like a boardroom. Laying out data to prove a structural failure, he submitted the registry printout as Exhibit A. He proved the notary commission expired 2 years before the amendment was stamped. That invalid seal made the signature void. He also entered a bakery receipt, placing Grandma June 200 miles away on October 14th. He pointed at the receipt proof my grandmother bought a tart while Elena was allegedly signing papers. He filed Dr. Thorne S. medical notes, confirming June was sharp and Elena was a thief. Then, Sterling entered the blue ledger. He proved Elena forged the amendment to lock down the estate before anyone caught her 4 years of elder financial abuse. Sarah tried to jump in, but that receipt killed her claim. When she insisted June drove to Seattle, Sterling just tapped the timestamp. That 4-hour drive made her timeline physically impossible. The trap snapped. The hearing lasted 40 minutes. Sterling didn't need the rest. The fake seal and the geography destroyed her. The facts were set in stone. She switched to a pathetic performance of raw victimhood. Sobbing, she begged the judge to see her as a grieving granddaughter targeted by a bully. She claimed she only wanted to honor June. Judge Holloway didn't offer a tissue. He didn't even blink. He slammed his gavel, the sound echoing like a gunshot. He stared her down and delivered the final ruling. "Forgery is a precise crime," he said. Ice cold. He looked at me, noting our proof. "Paper is patient. Miss Miller, the court is not." Holloway struck down the forged amendment with prejudice. Elena was finished. He released the trust funds, giving me back full control. The war was over. We walked out into the silent marble hallway. Nia and Leo were right behind me. Elena stumbled out, her 30-year mask shattered. Face flushed, hands shaking, she blocked our path. "This is not fair," she screamed. "You manipulated her. You stole my life. She was mine. You were just the help." I looked at my cousin, feeling nothing. No anger, no pity, just the calm of a balanced ledger. I looked her in the eye and kept my voice low. "It was never about love, Elena. It was about logistics. You were just bad at math." I walked to the elevator, leaving her trembling. We stepped inside and the doors shut, leaving her on the 14th floor. The trust was safe. But that blue ledger had triggered a storm. This civil victory was just the start. The silence in the elevator felt different today. Gone was the fear from the will. Reading this was the peace of a battle won. We stepped into the crisp air. The civil dispute was dead, but our evidence was just catching fire. Judge Holloway wasn't the type to ignore elder financial abuse and a forged seal. He wasn't walking away. Bound by duty, Holloway wrote a referral detailing the perjury and theft. He sent the entire packet to the white-collar crime division. That blue ledger was still a weapon. It acted as both a shield against her fake dementia claims and a record of her greed. By the end, the court confirmed she had siphoned roughly $140,000 over 4 years. As the new trustee, I demanded the money back. Elena was dry, her accounts were empty, her credit was trashed, and her house was facing foreclosure. She had zero capital when a debtor cannot pay. The law finds other ways. Sterling filed a writ of execution. The court authorized the seizure of her assets to pay back the estate. The execution was poetic. Elena built her life on luxury goods and social media clout, all bought with my grandmother's money. She wore those labels like armor. 3 days later, sheriff deputies arrived with yellow tape. They didn't care about her digital aesthetic. They treated her designer goods like common commodities for an auction. Sterling sent me the report later that week. Rows of Italian bags, designer shoes, and the emerald brooch she had stolen from June. They emptied her closet, tearing down the empire she had built on lies. The items didn't go to boutiques. They were taken to a fluorescent-lit auction house. Elena's pride was sold off on folding tables to the highest bidder. The auction proceeds filled the trust, covering the deficit. The status symbols she bought were now paying her debts. But the humiliation was just the start. The district attorney reviewed the judge's referral. Forging a notary seal is a serious felony. Perjury means prison. Prosecutors began the indictment. Elena needed a high-end criminal lawyer now, not a probate attorney. Elite lawyers don't work for free. Aunt Brenda saw the arrest coming. The ruin she courted by funding the Civil War was now eating her alive. Her home's second mortgage was draining her pension. Her social circle vanished as the news of the forgery spread. She was isolated, drowning in debt and desperate to keep her daughter out of a cage, Brenda was out of moves. She called friends, who turned her away. She tried banks, who rejected her. Cornered, she called the one person in the valley with actual cash. 2 in the morning, I was sitting at my kitchen island, reviewing trust documents, planning to move the capital into high-yield assets. The apartment was quiet. My phone lit up the counter, vibrating against the stone. It was Aunt Brenda. I didn't answer. I let it ring into voicemail. I walked to the coffee maker, set my mug down, and pressed the button. The machine started grinding. A notification pinged. I hit speakerphone. Brenda was sobbing. No arrogance, just a ragged, desperate sound I had never heard from her before. "Josie, please," she begged. "Pick up. I know it's late. Elena is terrified. The prosecutor is coming. We need a lawyer, and I have nothing left." "I can breathe," she choked out. "She says your cousin, Josie. We re-family. You have the trust money. You won." June would want her own granddaughter in jail. "Just loan us the fee. I'll pay it back. I swear. Don't turn your back on us." I stood there, coffee in hand, listening. She was using my grandmother's name to buy guilt. She was preaching loyalty while ignoring 4 years of treating me like an ATM. They didn't care about family when Elena was stealing my cash. They only found their morals when they needed bail money. The line clicked dead. Silence filled the room. I felt nothing, no guilt, no desire to lecture. The ledger was balanced. I hit the trash icon and the file vanished. I sipped my coffee. Forgiveness is a choice, but access to me is a privilege. Have you ever had to cut off family? I woke up early. Sunlight hit the floor. I didn't reach for coffee. I walked to the whiteboards that had run my life for weeks. The battle was done. Time to clear the war room. I wiped away the timelines, the photos, the web of lies. I erased Elena's name. The wall was finally blank. I wasn't a soldier anymore. I was a manager getting back to business. I met the Sterlings at 10. We weren't there to fight. We were there to build. June didn't fight for years just to let her money rot. Sterling handed me the forms. $4.2 million was sitting in dead. Stagnant bonds. I signed the paperwork to kill those old investments. Naya checked the routing numbers like an architect. We shifted the capital into high-yield tech funds and stable real estate. We were building something that could actually grow. I watched the numbers move on the screen. Everything clicked into place. My grandmother had the vision, but I had the logistics. I turned her legacy into an engine that would compound for decades. Wealth finally secured. I moved to the final task. The bank had seized everything from the old estate, including the fleet of luxury cars Karen used for her scams. They were auctioning them off. I drove to the impound lot on a Tuesday. Under a heavy grey sky, rows of seized vehicles waited for new owners. I wanted only one, a navy blue 1968 convertible. Jessica loved that car, thanks to a velvet box in a hidden wall safe. I held the original key. Karen never found it, making her supposed ownership worthless. I stood in the warehouse, paddle in hand. The room was packed with sharks and collectors. When the convertible hit the block, bidding soared. I waited until the room fell silent, then dropped a bid that ended it. It was pocket change for my new portfolio. I settled the bill, grabbed the title, and walked to the lot. The blue paint shimmered in the flat light. I slid the silver key into the lock and turned it. The engine hummed to life, sounded perfect. I hit the road, skipping home, aiming for the ridge. The hilltop cemetery overlooks the valley. I pulled over. The air felt sharp, heavy with frost and pine. I stepped onto the grass. Her headstone was simple granite. No flowers, those just wither. I brought a status report. "In the freezing cold," I whispered. "The books are balanced. The assets are climbing. Debt is gone." I thought about the nightmare of recent months, the whispers, the fake signatures, and my cousin's pathetic threats. Zero regret. People say family bonds are ironclad. That is a lie. Walking away wasn't cruel. Cutting off their corruption was survival. My grandmother saw the rot coming years ago. She gave me the map to save myself. She taught me to prune the dead wood to save the tree. I touched the hood of my car. The war was over. I was ready to build. I planned to use this wealth to help others, just like she wanted. But as I planned for the future, the final blow from my cousin S. ruin was already coming. 6 months passed. Winter ice turned to spring. The legal system kept grinding forward. The prosecutor didn't offer my cousin a deal. With a signed confession and a forged seal, you don't bargain, you prosecute. A grand jury indicted Sarah on a Tuesday for felony forgery, perjury, and fraud. Since civil forfeiture drained her accounts, Sarah had nothing left for a lawyer. She faced the bench with a public defender. Trial was set for autumn, drowning in legal fees and having lost her inheritance. Sarah filed for bankruptcy. She dumped her apartment and vanished. The elite crowds moved on without her. Her social media went dark. The people who once cheered her life forgot her name in weeks. She was a ghost. With the threat gone, I started building. The trust performed exactly as planned. The high-yield portfolio paid out solid dividends. I didn't touch the principal. I had my team funnel earnings into a new non-profit. I called it the Miller Foundation. We rented a shop in a tough neighborhood. It wasn't a standard charity. It was a training hub for local teenage girls, teaching them high-level literacy and supply chain logistics. We taught them to master spreadsheets, audit inventory, and decode complex legal contracts. We gave them the analytical tools to build their own fortresses. My grandmother always said logistics is the art of placing things where they belong. The foundation gave the next generation skills to own their space. While it grew, my daily life stayed anchored at the warehouse. I kept my role as a supply chain manager. I loved the grit of the job, the diesel fumes, the paperwork, and the steady flow of freight keep me grounded. It was a Thursday in May. Our facility was expanding for a massive shipping contract. HR needed an extra coordinator to handle the surge in driver manifests. They scheduled 3 interviews for my morning block. 3 resumes sat on my desk by 8. I prefer interviewing without names or backgrounds. I judge candidates on how they carry themselves in the moment. At 11, the glass door swung open. The final candidate stepped in. It was Aunt Brenda. I sat behind my desk watching her. The transformation was shocking. The arrogance she wore at the grocery store was gone. She wore a cheap, stained suit from a bargain rack. Her posture was shattered. The second mortgage she took for Sarah's legal bills had ruined her. The bank took her house. Now she needed an entry-level salary just to afford a studio. She was living the harsh reality she used to mock. Brenda looked up from her folder. Our eyes met. The blood drained from her face, leaving her ghost white. She locked up. Her knuckles went pale as she gripped her imitation leather purse. She realized the nephew she once called a parasite was now holding her future. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I kept my face blank. I pointed to the chair. "Please take a seat, Brenda." My voice was level. She moved with stiff, clumsy steps. Her hands were shaking as she tucked her purse away. She opened her mouth, but the words died. She looked around my office, taking in the logistics certifications and workflow charts. I opened her application and scanned the pages. I noticed the 20-year gap in her work history. She had spent decades living off her late husband's pension and borrowed money. She had 0 experience with modern software or tracking systems. Her resume was a desert. I closed the folder and folded my hands on the desk, lining up my fingers perfectly. I stared right into her eyes. The silence was loud, filled only by the hum of a forklift outside. I delivered my verdict with cold, professional courtesy. "Your work history has some serious gaps. Brenda, this coordinator role requires strict data verification and real administrative oversight. We rely on past performance to ensure we don't have errors. Unfortunately, I have to pass on your application due to a lack of verifiable references." Brenda stared at me. She got the message. No yelling, no begging. The books were closed and the request denied. The war was over. This was just the permanent aftermath. She stood up, said nothing, and walked out of the glass office. I watched her cross the concrete warehouse floor toward the exit. I opened my email and prepped for the afternoon. Friday evening brought a warm breeze off the canyons. I drove up the mountain road, leaving the city behind. I had bought a small log cabin higher up. It was smaller than the old estate, but it was all mine. The deed was clean. No hidden debt, no toxic history. I sat on the front porch, breathing in the pine. The sun dipped behind the ridge, painting the sky in deep purple. Leo was by the patio, turning vegetables on the grill. Smoke drifted into the air. Mia sat in a folding chair, reading a legal thriller with her glasses on the tip of her nose. I rested my laptop on the patio table. The screen glowed in the twilight. I was updating a spreadsheet for the foundation. Column A tracked the incoming resources. Column B tracked the outgoing costs. Every digit fit perfectly into its cell. The columns lined up, mapping out a life of stability. I listened to the wind in the trees. I thought about the forged documents, the threats, and the loud, arrogant lies that used to haunt me. Those noises were dead, silenced by the truth. Real victory doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need a spotlight. It is just the quiet, undeniable peace of a life well lived. There is a quiet tragedy that plays out in homes across this country every day. It rarely starts with a judge's gavel or a sudden foreclosure. It starts soft. It starts with $50 stolen from a purse on a random Tuesday. It starts with a mother who sees the theft, turns her head, and picks the easy path of silence over the hard work of parenting. Looking back at the wreckage of that conflict, the forged papers and the broken families, it is easy to call it a legal thriller or a money fight. But beneath the trust funds and the real estate is a mirror reflecting the reality of modern parenting, family duty, and our culture. We raise our children to do more than just survive. We want them to carry a legacy of honesty and grit. Parenting is rarely about physical comfort. It is the hard, painful duty of forcing your child to face their own flaws. Sarah ignored her daughter Chloe's small lies early on. Sarah thought she was protecting the girl from a harsh world, but shielding a child from consequences is no protection. It is a slow betrayal. When you erase every rough edge, you do not raise a resilient adult. You cultivate an entitled person destined for ruin. Chloe grew up thinking rules were mere suggestions that did not apply to her. She learned from her mother's blindness that she could take whatever she wanted without paying the price. This failure reveals a major flaw in how we view responsibility today. We live in an era where fake digital wealth hides the reality of hard work. Chloe embodies a culture hooked on the superficial. She is part of a generation living for social media clout and designer bags bought on credit. Expensive champagne for the cameras. Historic mansions rented just for clout. Chloe wanted the crown but refused to carry the weight. She grabbed that massive estate, blinded by greed to the mountain of tax liens and crushing debt. Here is the lesson. You cannot split ownership from work. Inheritance is not just a bank balance. It is a duty if we do not teach our kids to handle the load. Any gift we leave behind becomes an anchor that sinks them. The real tragedy is Sarah, in a desperate attempt to protect her daughter from fraud charges. Sarah mortgaged her home for top-tier lawyers. She torched her retirement, her stability, and her sanity now. Sarah is flat broke, working minimum wage in her golden years. It is a dangerous lie that parents must sacrifice everything for their kids. Blindly sacrificing for an adult child is not noble, especially when it just funds a scam. Good parenting means knowing where you end and your child's accountability begins. It takes guts to cut the cord and let a grown kid stumble so they finally learn to stand. Unlike the enablers, Maya chose wisdom and grit. She did not win through screaming matches. She won with a rock-solid plan. Like my grandmother used to say, common sense is just putting things where they belong. To win, look at facts, not the blurry lens of emotion. Read the fine print before you sign anything. Look past the flash to see the real price tag. Maya shows how a paper trail wins. When scammers twist reality, your integrity is your strongest defense. Honesty is not just a nice idea, it is a tool to survive the mess. Sometimes strength is not fighting back. It is staying silent and gathering facts while your enemies burn themselves out. Real success is not about bragging or chasing likes. It is the peace of a stable, honest life. It is the hum of steady paychecks and a clear conscience at night. If this story rings true, or if you have had to set boundaries with toxic family, please subscribe to Reality Check. We share these because reality beats fiction every time. Let us build a community that values firm boundaries, true accountability, and the power of walking away. As you put your phone down, think about the legacy you are creating. What lessons are you leaving behind? Every choice builds your future. Look at the people in your life. Are you trusting them with too much, or starting a fire you cannot control? The answer is in the fine print.